Hey there, this is Nolan Crowley doing the voiceover narration for the policy recommendation to a decision maker assignment for Johns Hopkins University. Civics education. What approach should our state or district take? The policy recommendations that I'm going to outline over the course of this presentation seek to answer this question. But before I go ahead and outline my policy recommendations, allow me to provide you with a brief summary of what civics education actually is. To put it as simply as I possibly can, civics education prepares students to engage with their communities civically and politically. However, globalization has changed the very idea of what citizenship means and raised many questions on how to effectively teach civics. There is no standardized international approach to civic education, and it varies dramatically based on country to country, and even dramatically from state to state inside the United States. A quote that I found doing research for these policy recommendations is listed below. Diversity rather than uniformity is the main characteristic of the civic curriculum. And I thought that was a great summary of the complicated issue that is international civics education. But thankfully, this policy recommendation hits much closer to home. So the decision maker that I will be providing my policy recommendations to in this hypothetical is Kay Ivey. She is the governor of Alabama since 2017. She is a member of the Republican Party. She is the United States' third most popular governor, and as of 2018, shared a 65% approval rating. She's a very popular figure in the state of Alabama, and her political alignment to the Republican Party and the more conservative wing of the Republican Party plays a big role in my policy recommendation, as you will see going forward. So, to better understand my policy recommendations, allow me to give you Alabama's takes on civic education. The Alabama course of studies lists civics and government as a strand within the subject of social studies and history. There is no civics and government, you don't take civics and government classes throughout Alabama. You take social studies or history classes that have focus on civics and government. Civics and government, as I just mentioned, civics and government related learning objectives are included in every grade's course of study. That being said, the 7th and 12th grade hold particular importance as concerns civic education. In the 7th grade, students concentrate on the area of civics, and in the 12th grade, students concentrate on the government of the United States. 7th and 12th grades are the most important grades in Alabama in terms of civic education. It should also be noted, and this is extremely important, that students must pass a social studies subject area test of the Alabama High School graduation exam to receive a high school diploma. It is necessary that students have a basic working understanding of civics and the United States government, as well as history, for students to graduate and get their diploma in Alabama. Continuing on, the stated goal of the civics and government strand, according to the Alabama course of study, is to enable students to become informed, responsible participants in political life and to function as competent citizens committed to the fundamental values and principles of the constitutional democracy that established the Republic of the United States of America. Some sample standards from the Alabama course of study are included here on your right, but I will focus specifically on the last two, 7th and 12th. Both of these are specifically related to the tests that students are required to take during those grade years. So in 7th grade, you have students describing individual and civic responsibilities of citizens of the United States and determining ways to participate in the political process. And in the 12th grade, you have students describing the process of local, state, and national elections, et cetera, et cetera. So the following key issues guided my policy recommendations. What constitutes a high-quality civics education? What types of standards, tests, credit, and course requirements should be associated with civics? What kinds of provisions should be made for civic education? How does globalization impact civics instruction? And most importantly, in my opinion, is how do we improve student achievement and involvement in the domain of civics? My first policy recommendation takes the form of high-stakes standardized examinations. This policy recommendation is based off of a 2010 Florida state legislation that required all middle school students to take a high-stakes civics exam. This exam would count for 30% of a student's final grade. Because this test took up such a huge portion of a student's final grade, civics became a much bigger focus during instructional time in history classrooms in the state of Florida. Florida already implemented a new extensive system of tests for math and reading before the implementation of a similar civics exam. This means that the teacher training, time and money spent on getting that done, and all the other infrastructure that comes with laying out a system of standardized testing already existed and definitely played a huge role in getting this high stakes standardized examination passed in the state of Alabama. A similar testing policy could be implemented in Alabama, a state that already has a similar extensive testing system in place for multiple subjects, such as reading and math. My second policy option is project-based assessments. This is based off a piece of Tennessee state legislation that requires students to take a project-based assessment in civics at least once in grades 4 through 8 and once in grades 9 through 12. This is similar to what Alabama does in grades 7 and 12 in regards to their civics examinations. But a move towards project-based learning and examinations would reduce the amount of time and money spent on testing. What this means is that as opposed to Alabama, where we have standardized multiple choice, short answer, essay-based standardized exams, the assessments in the state of Tennessee are project-based. This focus on projects could increase student involvement in so-called quote unquote deep civics. And what they mean by deep civics is actual student engagement in local politics and civic engagement, such as running for local election and dealing with other local political issues. And finally, our third option would be interactive courses without assessments, which is heavily based on Hawaii. Some civics classes in Hawaii reject testing entirely and push students to engage in local politics or organizations as a form of assessment, or at least for a grade. This push for students to engage civically with their communities accomplishes one of the main objectives of teaching civics in the first place, namely improving civic engagement among students and eventual citizens of the United States. This policy would put a greater emphasis on learning outside of the classroom, as opposed to the aforementioned policy recommendations that would be taking place entirely during school hours, And like the aforementioned project-based learning policy recommendation, this policy would also reduce time and money spent on testing. Now, out of those three options, I believe that high-stakes standardized examinations makes the most sense for the state of Alabama. As mentioned earlier, Florida and Alabama share many similarities, but most importantly, both share an educational focus on standardized examinations. That being said, the infrastructure, teacher training, and familiarity with testing procedures among students already exists in the state of Alabama. Existing standardized exams on social studies or history could be modified to have a greater focus on civics. These modifications to the existing tests would be relatively inexpensive when compared to the cost of implementing a new project-based or assessment-free curriculum. That being said, Kay Ivey is a conservative even among the Republican parties. She has been seen to reject any large ranging attempts at education reform in the state of Alabama that do not take the place of privatized or charter schools. I believe that she would be more open to having a high stakes standardized examination that would be relatively cheap and take advantage of the aforementioned teacher training and infrastructure already in place to, implement these standardized tests in the first place. That being said, I do understand that students are already over-tested, but if the goal of this assignment was to provide a stakeholder or policymaker with a solid policy recommendation that they actually would probably implement, I would have to go with high-stakes standardized examinations. Thank you for listening. I did a few dry runs of this, but I'm not a very good public speaker. I would like to personally thank you, Professor, once again for allowing me to submit this assignment late. I think my recent medical problems have played a big role in me not being able to speak so well right now. So thank you for that. Oh, and here is my references for this examination. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy.